Well, U.S. Supreme Court justices appeared skeptical of President Trump's decision to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Mr. Trump removed the central banker last year, accusing her of engaging in mortgage fraud. Ms. Cook has denied those charges. The lower courts had earlier blocked her removal while the case is underway. The case against Ms. Cook is seen as the most significant challenge to the Fed's autonomy since it was formed in 1913. Now, conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh, among others, raised concerns around central bank independence during the hearing.
There's a balance struck here. This is not a ironclad, you can never be removed. There is a cause removal authorization.
But on that, your position that there's no judicial review, no process required, no remedy available, very low bar for cause that the president alone determines, I mean, that would weaken, if not shatter, the independence of the Federal Reserve that we just discussed.
We're joined by Saikrishna Prakash, James Monroe Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Virginia. Professor, we thank you for your time today. Just want to start off on the reaction from the justices at the Supreme Court. So they're appearing kind of skeptical, as what we saw during the, or rather, reports say during the oral arguments. I mean, what does this suggest about how seriously the justices view the Fed's statutory protections, as well as the principle of central bank independence in the U.S.?
It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I think you're quite right that the justices, a majority of them, are skeptical of the removal of Lisa Cook by President Trump. And I think it's fairly clear that President Trump will lose this case. And so we have an interesting situation where most so-called independent agencies are going to be brought under the president's control, but the Fed will be treated differently. Why will it be treated differently? I think part of that has to do with the sense that the Fed is somehow different than these other agencies, A, and B, a sense that fiscal policy generally runs better if it's not subject to political interference, which isn't precisely a constitutional matter, but it obviously is influencing some of the justices.
Yeah, just to pick up on that point before we delve deeper into what happened at the hearing, when you say that, the Fed is being viewed differently, then what about, the case about the National Labor Relations Board? Trump was able to oust top officials there. That is also a key board dealing with key data that, Fed bases their policy decisions on. And then what happens to, say, the SEC or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation?
My prediction is that the court will decide that the president has constitutional power to remove all those officers and that Congress can't restrict the removal, and that they will treat the Fed as different than all those boards. And so the president's generally going to win on this question of removal, except in the case of the Federal Reserve. Now, how they split the world in that way, how they're able to bifurcate these decisions in that way is not quite clear, but they're very smart people, and if they want to do something, they'll be able to do it. So I think they will say that the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is subject to presidential removal, as well as the SEC and these other agencies, but they will have a carve out for the Fed.
Okay. So just going into some, key statements being made during the hearing, Justice Kavanaugh there saying that the Trump administration's move could weaken, if not shatter, the Fed's independence. How legitimate are his claims, and what are the implications that this case could have on the selection of the next Fed chair?
Well, on the last question, it won't have any implications for who's selected, because I think the president's going to try to select someone who he believes will work hand in glove with him. And then there's just a question of whether the Senate agrees to confirm that nominee. The president was always going to appoint someone he perceived as a loyalist, or someone who would, if not take instructions, would certainly do what the president wanted him or her to do. In terms of what Justice Kavanaugh said, what people don't quite understand is that in this case, the president isn't claiming a constitutional power to fire the Federal Reserve Board member. What he's saying instead is There's a statute that says that she can be removed for cause. I believe there is cause, therefore I am firing her. And so this is really a statutory interpretation case. What does it mean to have cause to remove someone? Is there a process you have to go through in order to find cause? Is there supposed to be a judicial process of some sort? And then finally, can this be reviewed by the courts? That is to say, after the president goes through whatever process is necessary and meets the standard as he sees it, will the courts come in and decide whether the president was right or not? And the Solicitor General is basically saying it's all up to the president. There's no judicial review and the standard's really low. And that's when Justice Kavanaugh comes in and says, well, then the for-cause removal standard really serves no purpose. It doesn't limit the president at all. And that telegraphs, as you well noted, that telegraphs that Justice Kavanaugh is going to hold against the president because he thinks the for-cause standard means more than what the administration takes it to mean. So the president, I think, will lose this case, but he'll lose it on statutory grounds, not on constitutional grounds. What that means ultimately is that he won't try to remove someone on constitutional grounds because the court's already told him that they value Fed independence, which signals that they're not going to permit him to remove them on constitutional grounds.
Right. And what does this all mean for Jerome Powell if, say, the court upholds the president's move to oust Lisa Cook? Would that lower the legal barrier to removing Jerome Powell as well?
Well, I think the problem is that the president's going to lose this case. So it's speculative to talk about what would happen if he won. If he won the case, I think he'd fire all the people that he disagreed with on the Fed board, the folks who haven't been lowering interest rates fast enough. And the justices know that, right? The justices know that if he wins this case, he will find a reason to fire all of them. So given that they want to preserve Fed independence, at least the majority does, I just don't see how they're going to vote in favor of the president. I think Lisa Cook will remain in office. And I don't think that the president will be able to fire Jerome Powell. Having said that, the president will continue to try to pressure the Fed. He will do what's called jawboning and try to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates, whether or not he can fire them. And of course, the president is the loudest voice in America. And when he says something, people take notice, even if they are nominally independent, right? The president criticizes federal judges all the time. They are very independent, but they still take his criticisms seriously, and it's a worrisome habit of his.
All right, Professor, we appreciate your time. Saikrishna Prakash there, James Monroe, Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Virginia.